welcome everybody, and good morning to you. And a real shout out to IOPSA and the PRB. Thank you very much for continuing to sponsor these conversations each week and making it possible for us to be able to meet in a week. Today we're going to talk, we're going to take our conversation to places of intentional choices, sticking with that absolute context each week, knowing that we can choose how we want to show up in life and how we want to respond and adapt to our circumstances. We're going to stay with that, but we're going to focus today on actually the question of living our lives and how we live our lives. How do we live and experience our lives each day? You can say, well, that's a strange question to ask because we breathe, right? We are living, we've got a pulse, we're breathing. But the reality is, how are we actually experiencing our life in its fullest form? And are we giving ourselves the opportunity with our choices to experience it in its fullest form? And when we look at living and embracing life, part of that living and embracing life is actually starts within us, that spirit of learning that we have right inside of us. You know, I could have called this particular building block that we have in this 5-part series that we're going to enter into now, I could have called it learning ethos or learning culture. But the reality is, it's not about something that happens around us. It's something that starts within us, and our ability to learn starts within us. And so that is connected to our choices. So let's have a look at this, a slide which really talks about how we classify living. I thought this is an interesting slide, and I just want to make sure that you can actually see it. It talks about to be classified as living and what it takes to be classified as that. And to be classified as living focuses on a couple of things, but I'm particularly focused on popping out or emphasizing the words growing and developing, or using energy and responding to the environment and adapting. And that kind of brings us to this question of, how are we growing and developing? How are we focusing our energy? How are we deliberately channeling our energy to growth and developing in order to respond and adapt? Now, I want to ask you a question now, and I'd like to invite you to go to that control on your webcam, which shows your hand. And we're going to just ask the question, who of you are entrepreneurs in the audience? So you started your business, you own your own business, and you go, the second part, that'll be the first people who vote. The second people who vote will be those who are not entrepreneurs. You work for someone else, you're an employee, maybe you don't work, you're attending here as someone who's a spouse. No problem, whatever your status is, it would be good to hear from you in terms of just lifting your hand. So what I'd like you now to do is just lift up your hand if you are an entrepreneur, and let's see what Kasim comes up with in terms of how many people are entrepreneurs in the room. And one of the points I wanted to make is just that research shows that entrepreneurs are actually more open to experiencing life. They will try and adapt to things. And so in a way, it's an invitation to say to you, if you are an entrepreneur, you already have in the bag the opportunity to embrace it, because kind of the essence of a learning spirit. You will want to experience something. So entering into this room, you will be open to an experience to actually learn and develop more so than others. However, it doesn't mean others aren't open to it, okay? So we're going to cover 3 areas. So what I wanted to really cover today is how we learn and create memories. Because this learning spirit starts with how we actually do it. And if we know and understand how we absorb things and how we process information, we can then start to understand how we relate to things, and we can also extend our minds to the concept of how those people close to us learn and create memories. And if you think about it, if we understand how people learn and create memories, we can then start to understand where we do connect and where maybe there's a bit of a mismatch. You know, sometimes we just miss each other and there's somehow a mismatch in that process. And I want you to think about that. So we're going to explore your unique way of creating memories. The same way, apply your mind to those around you in terms of how they are unique. And then you can start to unpack a few ideas of how possibly you can apply the insights from today's conversation to other areas of your life. We'll also cover what this means to you and how you attach, what meaning you attach to learning. You know, so many of us might think that learning is a drag, like even to be here is a drag, because we think, oh, it's just a way for us to get CPD points and a way for us to, you know, have a cup of coffee and do something different. And so we may attach a certain kind of meaning to learning, and that results in us actually, that results in our reality. If we think that learning is a drag, then it will be a drag. And so we'll talk about that and just what you then take out of today. So here's a question for you. Assume you can learn something from each person you meet. Now, this question is an unusual one for a coach to ask because we normally focus on open-ended questions. So your answer is going to be yes or no, you know, or maybe you don't know at this moment. But the reason I ask you this question is because I want you to start thinking about why do you take on that approach. So often we'll take, as we enter into a new room, or we meet somebody new, or we go to an event, or we dragged to a meeting against our will, we'll go there with a sense of, oh my word, you know, I'm not going to learn anything. This is going to waste my time. And inevitably, that is what happens to us. And, you know, I don't know if you've experienced that. You know, that 30-second pitch, when we're in the elevator, we talk about the 30-second pitch. We take 30 seconds to sum somebody up. So we'll look at them, we'll hear them, we'll listen to what they say, and whether their stuff is logical, and we'll kind of get a feeling in our gut about them, and we'll either now decide, okay, we can learn from them or not. So I want to just ask you to kind of open up your mind and say, what if I actually was approaching this almost like an entrepreneur, an artist, and saying, there's a possibility I can learn from each engagement that I have. And if you're in that space, those 30% of you that are entrepreneurs, when we engage like that, it's inevitable that we can come and apply one fact back to our business. So let's have a look at how we process information, and it just gives us a clue on what we might be missing out as well. This picture, I picked this picture just for you to take a moment to reflect on lockdown. You might have picked a completely different picture. You know, you've been learning. I chose the period of lockdown because it's 2 months already. Can you believe it? It's like 62 odd days. So today, this picture for me just reflects all our senses. It can appeal to all of our senses. So if you look at it, you can see a whole lot of color and texture. And so there's almost like a curiosity about what's going on in the picture. And this is one of the ways that we process, right? We process with seeing, hearing, feeling. We process with smell and touch. Less so with smell and touch, but a great deal with seeing, hearing, and feeling. And if you look at this picture, you can almost hear people talking. For me, as I've gone through lockdown, one of the things I've learned is just how wonderful it is to connect over cooking and preparing meals. So when I looked at this picture and saw 2 people, I immediately, when I see these hands and there's 2 sets of people here, I immediately thought about people talking, engaging, connecting. And when I look at it, I feel a sense of comfort. There's a sense of connection and comfort as I'm able to connect with people around this. It's almost like in my gut, it starts to feel warm. And you inevitably, if you look at this, I don't know about you, if you smell things really well, but when I looked at this red pepper, I realized I smell red pepper, and I could almost smell it as I was there, or I can taste fresh cucumber in my mouth as I even look at this picture at the moment. So this invitation is for you to start thinking about, how do you learn? Do you learn which mechanism of these senses do you gather information on? And we're going to explore them now at a deeper level and start to look at this just one by one. And I'm going to focus on these 3 up here. And I'm going to add also the concept of learning through thinking, so that you also can kind of relate to your customers in that regard. So this is the visual view, okay? So if I was writing over here, I would put a nice big V over here for visual. For those of you who learn via your vision, your sight, you will gather information with your eyes. And so there's a sense of you enter into a room and you are already you'll already almost like understand the spatial connections in the room. You will see things, you will be very observant to detail that I wouldn't necessarily see in a room. The kind of language that you would use if you process with sight is, okay, I see your point of view. And so you'll find yourself in a situation when you're engaging, say, with your spouse, if you are not using sight as part of your vision, your spouse will perhaps say to you, you don't see my new outfit, or you didn't see my haircut. And then you know, okay, your spouse is probably processing using visual processing mechanisms, and you are not. And that disconnect can sometimes leave us kind of with a gap between us. And so the opportunity lies in us exploring, if we're not visually learning, how can we improve that visual learning of ours? And part of it may be that very simple exercise of actually observing your spouse each morning and actually making comments of, I see that's a new top, or that color looks really good on you, and you explore that at that point. So let's just look at the second way of processing. You've understood visual, and let's just look at the second way of processing information and learning. And that's related to our hearing, right? I've chosen a visual saw over here because when I think of a saw, I hope it is a saw and you guys are more tool equipped, but if it's not, it's meant to be. In my mind it is, so bear with me. So a saw you can hear from miles away. You know, you don't have to be close to a saw, but many of you are going to process with hearing. So just imagine when you go out into the bush and you take a walk outside. If you're visually stimulated, you're going to see a lot of sights. You're going to see the prettiness. You're going to see things. But when we are stimulated and we learn with hearing, we're going to be sensitive to the sounds outside. We're also going to be sensitive to tones of voice. We're going to be sensitive to the nature of the words that are used. And you'll also use the kind of language when you learn by listening. You will use the kind of language, oh, I hear your point of view. And so you will connect to hearing kind of words. Now, think about this in terms of people you work with and people in your job, or in people or customers that you engage with. If your customer processes using hearing, you will need to be saying words that they can hear about what you are actually doing. So if I go, you know, if you're going to explain a job to me, you're going to have to explain it well. You can't show me pictures because I don't process only with pictures. I need to hear about it as well. For those of you who may not work with customers, but let's just take that nature example. Imagine how much fuller your life would be if you were able to hear your spouse more clearly. Do you know that we have a mechanism? We're not deaf. We turn our hearing off. We have this ability to turn our hearing off. And our spouses will tell us, they'll go, or our friends and family will tell us, you don't listen to me. And there's almost a sense of we are not using hearing words, and we are not demonstrating that we can hear them. So for customers, use hearing words. If you go out in the bush to live a fuller life, imagine how much nicer the experience will be if you are actually hearing the bush, if you are hearing and connecting. How does that change your living experience when you actually use that sense as well as your sight? So let's have a look at the next sense, which is essentially around sensing things and feeling. A lot of us process, if you kind of look at the sensitive, sort of this picture just depicts the sensitive connection between this cat and a human being, right? For a lot of us who process via feelings, we will use a lot of feeling words. And so in conversations, our language will sound like, oh, I'm just not feeling this. My gut's telling me this is incorrect. Now, when we think about that, we start to realize that a lot of people process with their bodies and in this feeling sensing space. And for some of you, it may be a sense of, if you are not processing with feeling, if you don't have a sense, if you can't connect to emotions, and you can't connect, or your advertising material or your conversation with a customer is not connecting with that feeling, with language that displays your feeling, you have a mismatch. You miss the opportunity to actually experience life in its fullest content, but also you miss the opportunity to experience a relationship and to learn from someone, because either they switch off or you switch off, and we lose each other in a sense. Okay, and so here This, if I was drawing a letter over here, I would draw a big K for you, because technically when we talk about feeling, we're talking about our kinesthetic ability, and we measure this kinesthetic ability, our ability to connect with feeling. The last one that I want to share with you is not part of our senses, but it is also part of the way we process information. And I wanted to add this because I think it's important, because a lot of people process information this way. We process it through our thinking capacity. We almost don't connect to our other, we do connect always with the other senses, but we almost don't utilize our senses. We spend a lot of time in our head, and we compute information, and we compute things based on logic. So the kind of language I would use if I do this, oh, the bottom line is, or I might say to you, give me the facts. And if I use terminology like this, you know that if I'm a customer, or I'm a colleague, or I'm a friend, or I'm a person that you're mentoring, you need to now focus on the facts. You need to focus on the detail related to common sense and facts, and give figures and understand clearly, how that invoice is made up. You've got to be very clear with the people that you connect with here, because they think in terms of facts, figures, and bottom line. And here is an opportunity for us, if you're very much in this headspace, I want you to think about, as we've reflected on this, which one of these methods do you mainly use for processing? Now, we use all of them, but you might use one or two primarily and the others less. So here's my question for you. I want you to, in your mind, rank from 1 to 4, which of these you use the most. When I first did this, I ranked thinking higher than all of my other senses, okay? And in fact, that was my reality. I focused on facts and figures. But to experience life, and every single day is so much more than facts and figures. If you spend all your time in your head, how on earth can you connect to yourself and to others at a more fruitful, living, adaptable way and a flexible way? So just check in your mind now, where were you? And at this point in time, I want you almost to go to the chat line. Please go to the chat line and just share, so we get a sense of what's going on for you. What is your prominent way of processing? And just learn it now. Just share it now. Share. I think a lot. I spend a lot of time in my head, or I listen to words. And if you listen to words, you will turn off if people use a specific tone. So share whatever it is that is going through your mind about these different ways of processing information. And as you're doing that, and you share that on the chat line, I almost wanted to say to you, what would it take? What would it take for you to develop another neural pathway? Now, when I ask you that, you're going to say, well, what on earth are you talking about? But when we are learning things, we almost have a default learning mechanism, and it's like a path that we create in a field. When we learn with thinking, for example, then we've developed a very good path in our brain that's like a well-worn path in our brain. Our brain automatically goes there. And so I want to almost say to you, yes, you're used to this path when you look at this picture. But if you can imagine what it would take to move off this path, like what would entice you to maybe develop your sense of sight more acutely, or your sense of hearing more acutely? It may be as simple as, my goodness, if I could do this, it would mean that I could connect to my customer better, because I would look at how we are engaging with the customer on site, and remember, I need to engage at all of those levels, because I can connect better. My customer is going to have better memories of me, because I will be appealing to them at the level in which they learn and communicate. So just think about what it would take for you to consider training your brain to open up some other opportunities to improve your life, and to improve your experience of life, or improve whatever it is you want to improve. Okay, that's up to you. So share that with us. And again, I'm going to come to, what do you believe about learning and development? Because whatever that is, if it's like boring or you're not good at it, I'm going to invite you to please reframe that. because you can see when we live, in order to be like that living human being, and by definition, we need to be able to learn and develop. So the invitation is reframe your thinking. If it is boring, reframe it and say, potentially, there is a lot more that I can achieve in my life if I learn, as opposed to it's just hard or boring. Just think about what you believe about learning and think about what you want to invite yourself into in terms of believing about learning and living your life. So I'm going to just pause there for a moment and ask you now for any questions, statements, and it would be wonderful to kind of see some of the statements that you might have been sharing on our chat line over the time. And let's just see, where are you and what are you actually feeling?